much attention. That story of violent repression of nonviolent civil rights protest is here too, along with accounts of the indigenous civil rights movement that both predated and followed the 1960s. I first visited Anniston in 1988 on an election year Super Tuesday swing through the South with the Reverend William Sloane Coffin. As a chaplain at Yale, Coffin had marched with civil rights workers in Selma in the 1960s. Coffin, who had recently been named president of a national peace organization, and I, as regional field organizer for the group, traveled through Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, pressing the case that any peace dividend realized at the end of the Cold War ought to be redirected to fight poverty. We spent an afternoon at the offices of the Anniston Star, in lively conversation with the newspaper's publisher, H. Brant Brandy Ayers. This nationally recognized, locally owned paper is at once information source, commentator, and major player in the Anniston story. Formerly called the Hot Blast, after the iron smelting method used by the town's first major industry, the paper has been a fixture in the city since 1882. Family patriarch Harry Mell Ayers, star editor and publisher through much of the Jim Crow era, moved among Alabama's power brokers, helping to shape Anniston's fortunes by courting the chemical industry and the military. Under his son Brandy's leadership, the Democratic-leaning paper, nicknamed by opponents the Red Star, has provided liberal commentary in conservative, now majority Republican, North Alabama. The passing of the Cold War era was especially consequential for this city. The two local military installations, Fort McClellan and the Anniston Army Depot, depended, even more than we then knew, on chemicals used in warfare, gaining or losing economically with each shift in U.S. defense policy. I returned to Anniston many years later with a new set of tools and questions that emerged from academic interests in the origins of social inequalities in environmental public health and the movements that are working to end such disparities. Attending a community health fair in Zinn Park in downtown Anniston in 2002, I met David and Shirley Baker, activists with Community Against Pollution, an organization committed to addressing the PCB problems. I visited with Opal Scruggs, who lived nearby and whose grandfather had worked at the Monsanto plant. Later, I talked with Cassandra Roberts and other members of the Sweet Valley/Cobbtown Environmental Justice Task Force and learned more about the ongoing fight to redress the harm of 70 years of exposure to Monsanto's PCBs. During the coming months and years, I interviewed people on all sides of the pollution debates, including Monsanto and Solutia officials in St. Louis, EPA and corporate remediation team staff on the ground, industry public relations consultants, military affairs personnel, and representatives of the Department of Homeland Security, which ran first responder live agent chemical training at the decommissioned Fort McClellan site. Acting on calls by historians for community-based histories of resistance and struggle, I talked with dozens of residents who participated in court cases over PCB contamination and organized opposition to chemical weapons incineration, as well as their attorneys and allies. I attended numerous community meetings held by local environmental organizations, the EPA, the Army's Chemical Demilitarization Public Relations Team, and others. I also began an informative association with members of the Anniston Environmental Health Research Consortium, researchers who conducted PCB health studies to determine the extent of PCB exposure and surveyed community perceptions of health and disease. Following the global pathway of PCBs led me to archives and experts from St. Louis to San Francisco to Stockholm. I pored over more than 7,000 pages of trial transcripts documenting the court cases brought by Anniston residents to hold Monsanto to account. In early summer 2003, to better understand community responses to plans to incinerate the chemical weapons stored at the Anniston Army Depot, I took part in the training being provided for residents of the Pink Zone, those areas most at risk of exposure to toxic gases if an explosion occurred during incineration. Depot workers were to begin dismantling the Cold War chemical weapons stockpile stored in Anniston later that summer and were distributing protective